All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome. I am so excited. We have such a lovely audience this evening, and it should be a really fabulous talk. I've been saying, we have a true boat celebrity with us today, a boat celebrity. And so I think we're really in for a treat. My name is Jill Ferris. I'm the Vice President of Education and Interpretation here at CBMM, and it's my pleasure to welcome you. Tonight's event continues our speaker programs, which kick off in the fall and will continue through the winter. We'll take a small break for the holidays. If you have not been looking at all of the different events that we have scheduled, a few that are coming up through the remainder of 2024, later this month on October 30th, Dr. Julie Shablitsky will be here to provide a glimpse into the historical research that has been going on with archaeology attempting to locate and interpret Harriet Tubman's birthplace in Dorchester County, which ties in really well with our new exhibition that we just opened, Sailing to Freedom Next Door. On November 13th, renowned artist Neil Harp will be here to share never before published photography of the Chesapeake Bay from the 1980s and 90s. And then in early December, our featured speaker will be Dr. Timothy Walker, a history professor at the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth, whose book, Sailing to Freedom, provided the basis for our exhibition, which is open next door. There's a lot more to come in 2025. A lot of the programs are up on the website. I have a few more to add as well. You are welcome to register now. If you really want to come to the Waterman Story Swap, which will be in March, get a ticket early. That one's going to sell out. But you're welcome to plan in advance and register, trying to make sure that you have the opportunities and can fit us into your schedules. It is you, our audience, that makes this worthwhile. And I will say that this summer, we put a survey out. Many of you responded and gave us feedback about what you wanted to see and hear more of. And the number one resounding response was boats. And so I am pleased tonight to deliver on exactly what you wanted. We have noted maritime journalist, historian, and lecturer Larry Chowning, who is with us this evening. Chowning was born and raised in Urbana, Virginia on the Rappahannock River. He graduated from Middlesex County, Virginia public schools in 1968 and studied journalism at the University of Richmond, where he graduated in 1972. He has been a general assignment reporter at the Southside Sentinel Weekly newspaper in Urbana since 1981, and since 1986, a field editor for National Fisherman Magazine based out of Portland, Maine, the nation's largest commercial fishing publication. It was shortly after graduating from college that Chowning began writing about the Chesapeake Bay region. Over the years, he has had hundreds of articles in print, traveled extensively throughout the Bay, and is considered by many an expert on subjects dealing with the lore, boats, and traditional aspects of Chesapeake Bay life. His articles have been published in regional, national, and international publications. He is the author of 12 books, with 8 that touch on some aspect of Chesapeake Bay heritage and culture. His latest book, Chesapeake Bay Deadrise Boats, was released in February by Arcadia Publishing of Charleston, South Carolina, and is for sale this evening. Most importantly, Larry and his wife Dee live in Urbana in the home his great-grandfather built upon returning home from the Civil War. And he has 3 children and 6 grandchildren. This evening, he'll provide us with a look at one of the most quintessential of Chesapeake boats, the Deadrise. The Deadrise and cross-planked bottom style of boat building started on the Chesapeake Bay in the 1880s when boat builders began to shift away from constructing vessels out of logs and into using planks to create hulls with a V-shaped bottom. These vessels have grown to be so popular in the Chesapeake that both Maryland and Virginia have named different deadrise vessels as their state boats. Tonight's evening, I'll note, is generously sponsored by the Upper Shore Regional Folklife Center. A number of you have come and purchased tickets, but we also have people who are able to participate because we no longer charge a ticket price. We have a suggested ticket price, and we get support from the Folklife Center to make sure that anybody who wants to be here is able to be here. Extending that, tonight's talk is available virtually. All of our talks are available virtually. So if you are ever not able to make it, you can participate from home. It is being recorded, and that recording, it'll take a few weeks to turn around, but all of our recordings are now going to live on YouTube. So tonight's program will live on in perpetuity so that we can continue to learn from the scholarship that we share tonight. So without further ado, I am excited to turn the microphone over to Larry.
Oh, okay. Let me start out. LaGrange Creek is a tributary of the Rappahannock River, about 4 miles from where I live today. Middlesex is bordered on the Rappahannock River to the north, Piankatank River to the south, and Chesapeake Bay to the east. The water has provided a natural resource that has generationally supported my family. After the growing of commercial tobacco faded in the late 1700s in Middlesex, the river, and specifically oysters, became the primary source of income for my family. God's oysters have been a generational gift that provided basic sustenance to Native Americans who had lived there. That too, for us Englishmen that came, also added a commercial element to it. And that too, for African Americans who during slavery found the river to be much less discriminatory in life and in their stomachs than what they were facing on land. By 1949, when I was born, the experiment of V-bottom and cross-planked bottom boat construction on Chesapeake Bay was nearing 70 years old. Howard Chappell, in his book, Small Sailing Craft, noted that Chesapeake Bay boat builders took up V-bottom construction in the late 1880s, and the bay became the acknowledged home, the V-bottom or deadrise boat, as we call it, in the entire country. And why not? The V-bottom style of boat was just right to cut through the choppy seas of the shallow waters of the Chesapeake Bay. And it was the right time in history for change. Log boats had dominated the maritime small craft history on the bay, but by the 1880s, it had begun to wane. Sail and wind power had driven the world, but in the 1880s, the same time deadrise boats appeared on the Chesapeake was the invention of the internal combustion engine. That changed the world that we lived in and increased demand for boats more easily adaptable to engines. Elements more suited to engines could be built into a small planked boat easier than a log boat. Also, demand for small, light, fast, stable, seaworthy, small craft for inshore fishing increased in the 1880s. As Howard Chappell noted, the early appearance of deadrise plank boats started on the eastern shore of Maryland and Virginia for use in the Tangier Sound. It was in the 1880s that the railroad came down the eastern shore, opening up new seafood markets for area watermen to provide product to northern cities. The most noted market was the soft shell crab market. Because soft shells are such a perishable product, the market had been limited to those places nearest the marketplace. The railroad provided an avenue for crabs to be shipped and delivered to those fancy city restaurants far away and in a timely manner. That market played a major role in creating a demand for, one, more small boats to work in the fishery, and two, a boat with a shallow enough draft to work in grassy shoal waters of Tangier Sound and to provide a stable enough platform to comfortably cruise through deeper waters to go back home and to go to the fishing grounds. It certainly stands to reason. And who would question Howard Chappell? Not me. It certainly stands to reason that Chappell was most likely right about the beginnings and the origin of the V-bottom boat on the bay. It was the ideal place for such a boat on the bay and an ideal time in history for it to happen. Also in the 1880s, African Americans had been free from slavery in Virginia for nearly 20 years. They went to the rivers after slavery. They went to the rivers and the creeks to catch seafood to earn money. The river and the oyster provided cash money, a very attractive element anytime, but particularly in Virginia after the Civil War. There was probably no time in history, before or after, where demand was greater for the small commercial fishing boats. To speak to the importance of the boat, whether it be log or plank, let me share with you my maternal grandfather's history of boat ownership. My grandfather's name was Raymond Blake, was a lifelong oysterman who started his working life aboard his father's open, double-ended, sail-driven log canoe. Granddaddy was born in 1898. He went to work full-time on his dad's boat as a colored boy the day he turned 11 years old. During the oyster season, they moored their canoe to a stake in Whiting's Creek on the Rappahannock River and kept a skiff on shore to reach the boat. When the season was over, they'd take the sails and mast out, store them in the loft of their barn, get the men in the neighborhood to help, and they'd pull and slip the 3-log canoe up shore, and then they'd cover it for the rest of the year with old sails that were left over. There was a community slipway there on the creek shore where there were logs in the water, not a railway, a slipway, where there were logs in the water and up on the shore. And they'd slip the canoe up far enough on the beach, flip it over onto logs where it stayed until the next oyster season. For the rest of the year, they'd use a flat-bottom skiff for their water needs. My grandfather bought his first boat at the age of 16. Went to Urbana, the town I live in. And for $75, he bought a 28-foot open 3-log canoe that had a 1-cylinder Atlas engine in it. He bought her from Columbia Burton. Most of us knew him as Captain Lum. I didn't know him, but that's what he was called, Captain Lum. A Civil War veteran who was a premier shaft tong maker in the town of Urbana. Every year, Captain Lum would, in addition to making hundreds of wooden shafts for tongs, would buy one open log canoe to repair and refurbish and to resell at the start of the next oyster season. He promised a young Raymond Blake that he'd hold the boat for him if he had $75 at the start of the oyster season. Granddaddy was able to buy the boat and worked it for over a decade. My grandfather found additional work with the boat in the off season by taking people out in the river to bottom fish. And over time, he realized he needed a larger boat with some covering to accommodate customers. My grandfather's goal, like most oystermen on the Rappahannock, was to get to a point he could have a new boat built out of planks, a deadrise and cross plank boat with a house for storage, room for more people to fish, and an engine that would push him faster than a sailboat. Along about 1934-35, with a growing family, he had Lawrence Parker build him a new boat. Lawrence Parker was not a boat builder. He was a boat finisher, meaning Granddaddy had to go to Deltaville and hire a boat builder to come to Mr. Parker's house to set the bottom of the boat up. Mr. Wright, the crew of 2 other men, came and set her up upside down as they built them on the shore. They created the semi-V shape in the bottom with keel, stem, some side runners mounted, and made sure it was secure enough that Mr. Parker, with my help of my grandfather, could finish her off. That was the only other boat he ever owned. She was 38 feet by 12 feet. She had enough room to accommodate the 35 or 40 bushels of oysters that he caught in a day, and 15 or so passengers that he carried bottom fishing. He had her hauled once a year, every year, in Deltaville. He had a new bottom put on her in 1962, and it lasted him until he retired in 1975. She had a house, but no pilot house. She had a stick for steering. Over her life, she had 2 engines. My grandfather's secret of ownership of his boats was similar to hundreds of Bay families who relied on the water to make a living. Moving from log boats to planked deadrise boats was a sign of progress in the family. Granddaddy and my grandmother had 8 children. One was my mother. There were 4 boys and 4 girls, and none ended up working the water. But the water and my grandfather's boat, his Deadrise boat, created a dynamic, or played a dynamic role in the lives of those children and the grandchildren. I remember fondly on Saturdays, he'd never take anybody fishing on Sunday, but on Saturdays when he didn't have a charter, he'd take the family out, and what an experience that was. I started writing Barcat Skipper about 1974. I had no idea then the path I would take would lead to nearly 40 years of writing for National Fisherman, the nation's largest seafood publication, and also about commercial fishing boats. But it did, and here I am. I did take journalism courses at the University of Richmond, but I've had no professional training with a camera. So I tell people that I'm a white collar journalist and a blue collar photographer. But in any event, I have brought some photographs. Over the years, I took black and white for many years, accumulated over 12,000 negatives for National Fisherman. I'm not going to show you 12,000 negatives tonight. But the ones you will see here are just a few from a box from the late 1980s, 1990s. And what I'm going to do is begin to show you and give you a little spill on each one of them. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. First photo, you are inside of Alvin Sibley's boat shop. Alvin Sibley was a boat builder. The late Alvin Sibley was a boat builder who, like so many boat builders, learned how to build boats from a family member. His father-in-law's name was Johnny Crab Weston, nickname Crab. And anyway, Johnny taught him how to build boats. Johnny Crab Weston learned from his uncle, named Big Johnny Weston. Big Johnny Weston learned from the first generation of deadrise and cross-plank boat builders, who was John Wright, who shifted from canoe building to deadrise building. And John Wright is one of the most well-known boat builders that came out of Deltaville, Virginia. See if I can figure this thing out there. Which one? All right, go back. Okay. Deadrise boats, hard times. That's a good name for a deadrise boat. But anyway, you can see the use of the boat. My grandfather was an oysterman, and he had a culling board. He started out at 11 years old. Well, he started out before that, but he stopped going to school when he was 11. He would cull oysters. The oysters in the bottom of the boat had been culled. They all end up on the culling board, and then he would cull through them. He got to a point that one day his dad was eating lunch. He picked up a pair of tongs and started tonging, and he caught about 30 oysters in one lick. After that, he never culled oysters again. They hired somebody else to do that. So. Chesapeake Bay log canoe. This photograph was taken in 1985. This is probably the type of boat my grandfather had. This one had a Model A engine in it, and she was in Havana Creek for years. She was built in Pocosin. She was 3 logs and about the size that my grandfather's boat was. She's gone. Unfortunately, I don't know exactly the year, but she finally died. Urbana lost a great boat when that went away. Charter boat fishing is a big part of the use of the Deltaville boats, and not Deltaville deadrise boats. This photograph was taken on a trip that I took with my son, and I did the story for the Southside Sentinel. Tim Haley, who's the captain of the boat. See if I can get it. There's Tim right there. Tim had this boat built by Alvin Sibley in 1986. In the spring, in May, I took my whole family out and we went charter boat fishing with him The main reasons I wanted to do that was wanted my grandchildren to throw a line over a 12-foot wide washboard and to feel what a wooden boat feels like. Maybe it'll be something they'll remember, but I remember with fondness going out with my grandfather on the boats. That's a young Larry Chowning. We went out that same day. We went out. We were trying to catch rockfish, and look what I caught. A bluefish, and what fun. African Americans, the Deadrise boat played an enormous role in the lives and families of African Americans, particularly in my area, and I think all up and down Tidewater, Virginia. These two generals, that's Dow Cook. Excuse me. That's Dow Cook right there, and I don't remember what his name was. But they were sitting in their boat one day, and they had a Deadrise boat, very similar to my grandfather's, except they have a pilot house on theirs. And I took their photograph. This is where they kept the boats. This dock in Middlesex County was exclusively used by African Americans. And you can see the diversity and the differences in the boats, particularly in the pilot houses, different pilot houses. Pilot houses are here. And they do look similar. This Ruth, what's so unique about her? She's got a round pilot house with windows in it. You don't see that hardly at all today anywhere. This boat was built by Lewis Wright. Lewis Wright was a third generation boat builder in Deltaville. And he built specifically a 38-footer. And he filled, according to him, and I believe him, he filled the Potomac River up with a 38-foot Deadrise. What was interesting about Mr. Wright was he was also an artist. And it was like folk art is what he did, but he just was a pretty good artist. The first time I ever met him, let me get some water, excuse me. First time I ever met him was in 1966. My mother had opened an art gallery in Urbana, and I have a picture of Lewis Wright. And he actually brought his paintings to the house. And then about 1983, I went to his boat shop, and he remembered seeing me there, and I remembered seeing him there. When I was talking about a stick, a steering stick, it's referred to down home as a guinea stick. The area of Guinea is in Gloucester County. Anybody ever heard of Guinea? Yeah, I would think so. So the most notorious waterman in the state of Virginia came out of Guinea. And anyway, this gentleman, he was from Guinea, and he started with this, and I did this. This was a story for National Fisherman. It was on crab pot haulers, as you can see. There's a crab pot hauler right there. There's a stick he's got in his hand. I use this photograph a lot. This is a Merlin shot. Long lining for crab pots is against the law in Virginia, but in Maryland it's used quite a bit, and it's the crab pot crabs, and they have able to throw them over, and they can fish more pots by doing it this way. But you can see the boats they're using. They also are they're fiberglass, but they're Deadrise boats. I just threw this picture in because you're not saying much longer. That's a crab house. It used to be one side of it. One side of it used to be for crab picking, which is very little crab picking in Virginia anymore. And the other part, the guys would pull up to the wharf, and they would sell their crabs, and the guy would come out and take them, and they'd take them in, they'd weigh them, and then they would go on their way. So it's a photograph you will not see probably more. It's crab dredging, boy, that's a crab dredging is if you've been reading about what's going on in Virginia, they've been considering reopening the crab dredge fishery. And crab dredge fishery was closed in 2008 because it catches primarily female crabs. It's done in the winter when the crabs burrow in the mud and they take dredges. There's a dredge on the back of this one, and a dredge on the side. So you've got, this is two styles of deadrise boat. This is referred to as a deck boat, and this is just a standard deadrise boat. For years, the only boats that were large enough to dredge out in the bay were the deck boats. But as time went on, boat builders began, particularly in the 80s and 90s, there was a resurgence of boat building in Virginia. And that was primarily because they needed larger boats that could carry two dredges on the stern to pull a crab dredge. So for about, I don't know, 10 years, there was a resurgence of boats being built in the 55-foot range, 50 to 55-foot range, to accommodate that fishing. Well, in 2008, that fishery shut down. And Virginia's been talking about reopening, but I don't think it's going to happen this year. In fact, I don't think it probably will ever open again. I don't know that. Most 80 to 85 to 90% of the crabs caught, if you look closely, are sooks. And this photograph was taken in 1984. And it's an archival photograph. You're probably never going to see this again, this type of fishery. Captain Johnny Ward, my gosh, he was originally from Chrisfield, Maryland, came to Deltaville, and he bought hundreds, well, I don't know about hundreds, but he owned probably 25 or 30 of this style boat over his lifetime. And the Iva W, which is still alive today, she's a double decker now. She's been made into a yacht. Somebody said, right, you know what I'm talking about, yeah. Anyway, this was when she was actually at Captain Johnny's wharf. That's the Deagle home, and I think that's the Thomas W, which is the P.E. Pruitt, which is still alive today, yeah. Anyway, John Barber has, not from this picture, but he has painted this picture, painted a painting, which is extremely popular. I don't know how I caught this, but I went out with Captain Johnny in 1984, and what an experience that was, I'll tell you. Nora W, some of you all should know the Nora W. She was referred to as the Crow Brothers up here. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, yeah. I think she was right here at Tillman for a while, wasn't she? I think she was. Wherever. Yeah, not. Oh, was that right? Oh, okay. Well, that's wonderful. Anyway, she was the largest of the Ward's boat. The only aluminum deadrise I know ever built was built in 1984. It was built in Amberg, Virginia. And what he did was he went and he talked to Willard Norris, who was a boat builder, and they drew it out. They drew it out some kind of way, and it's actually got a deadrise, a V-bottom bottom on it. This was taken right here, probably about 1985. Is it still here? Drake tell you, well, you know, over the years, in harvesting, there's a chapter on sterns on bay workboats, and I've written several articles on them. They fascinate me, and the different sterns that they have on these deadrise boats, and the reasons that they're there. This was a torpedo. They referred to it as being built in the style of a torpedo boat because she could move so fast, but she was real narrow. Well, if you know the boat, she's extremely narrow. And she was used up here, I think, mainly for trot line and things like that. The faces of the Chesapeake. I was delighted that I ran across this photograph. That horse's name is Midnight. Midnight is pulling pound poles out of the woods. You go in to cut pound poles, you select the pound poles, but you don't clear cut. So you can't get a tractor and you can't get mechanical stuff to it. So the use of a horse lasted until the early 1990s, and Midnight was this fellow right here, let's go back. He was way back in the woods. Was actually out on a pound net boat doing a story on Eddie Gaskins. And Eddie told me about him. I said, well, I'd like to do a story on him sometime. I'll tell you exactly where he is. He's getting pound poles from me right now. So I went there and way back in the woods, and I scared the poor man to death. I don't know who you thought I was. But anyway, that's a tradition that's gone today. It's, to my knowledge, I don't know of any. This would have been about 1991, so it's still around then. And there's a dead rise boat loaded down with pound poles. This aspect of the boat is referred to by watermen as a brake, the thing that holds the pound poles. It's referred to as a brake. But there you go. That shows them. I mean, it's quite a job to put those poles in the bottom. You have to have a stable platform, and you got to have a large enough dead rise boat that's going to give you that platform. And in this case, it does. There's another shot to just give you another important part of it, of pail netting, skiffs. And that also, for a long time, this fishery created demand for small skiffs. And so that also enhanced and pushed the wooden boat building into another decade or so. Hog and oysters. That was one of the main reasons these boats were built. They're standing on washboards. Most washboards are about 12 foot wide. And on the end, the board that runs along the side of the washboard is called a tow rail. And you use that to gauge where you are when you're up on that boat working, because you don't want to go that way. Okay, this gentleman, he wrote a book called Dead Rise From Here to Yonder. And he moved to Deltaville, and I think it's a classic. It's just a small paperback book on dead rise boats. But he moved to Deltaville. I went out and interviewed him, and he was building these little models. And Joe Gregory is his name. Joe's passed away, but he, as far as I'm concerned, and I don't know whether that book is in this museum, but it should be. He contributed a great deal to the history and preservation of dead rise boats with his little book, Dead Rise From Here to Yonder. John England restored the F.T. Crockett, and he also supplied for many years. And he also built these interesting little tuck-ups and all these other kind of boats that he really enjoyed doing. I think he comes in here quite often I know he came to the small craft thing last week. That's Mr. Wright. Mr. Wright, let's see, does he have, look at that, is that a cigar? Please tell me it's a cigar. He always smoked a cigar. Here you got all this stuff around here that's flammable, and he'd be, and I would go in thinking, am I going to make it out alive, you know? To my knowledge, I don't know that he ever burned anything down, but I don't know why not. This is a typical picture in Merlin in Virginia. This is just during oyster season. You see the boats rafted off. And I used to, as a kid, they'd come into Urbana Creek, and particularly when it snowed or there was ice, the oystermen would be home and nobody would be down there. And we would step from one boat to the other and put our footprints in the snow. I think that's when I first started loving dead rise boats. Oh, the railway, classic railway, you know, slipway. I told you about a slipway. Well, this is a railway. Internal combustion engines. Oh my God, look what it did. It took away the mule and it took away the men with stovepipe arms pulling those things up and making it simple. And they built the little railway. That's why it's called a railway. And these things, the wheels on the cradle. The cradle is what it's in. And the little wheels underneath here that actually slide, and you can see the rail right there. Tied to the railway. Oh, it was a revolution. I was looking after how to take care of boats when that came along. Oh,
I want to trade your microphone.
no, not working.
Getting a lot of static.
Okay.
All right.
Try that. Hear me? And no static. Okay. Oh, Nellie Crockett. You know that boat? She's a yacht now. She's owned by Ted Parrish, I think, I think he's in Delaware, actually. Anyway, when I went out on the Nellie Crockett, she was owned by James Ward. And he called me up in 1984 and asked me if I would want to do a story on him for his boat, because he'd seen some stuff in National Fisherman. I said, certainly, but I can't do it the day he told me to do it. So a year later, in 1985, I went out with him, and this was one of the shots. How they broadcast oysters. This is the way they did it for 100 years, just with a shovel and strong arm, strong back, and they'd cover the boat is just covered in oysters, and they're planting seed. So, oh, wrong way. All right. So, in 1984, I told him, I said, well, I'll come down, take a photograph of you going out, and then next year I'll go out with you. So this picture was taken in 1984, and that picture was taken in 1985. Oh, dead rise and cross point. There it is. Dead rise. Let's see. Straight rise. What's going on? There it is. Straight rise from the chine, that's the chine, to the keel rabbet, where it's attached to the keel. The keel is down here, you can't see it. And it's got you see how it's shaped like a V, and it flattens out as it goes aft. Okay, so that's the name dead. I mean, the word dead, a lot of people correlate it with straight. It's straight, dead straight, or dead on. And so that's one reason we believe the word dead rise came about. The other thing, or the other theory is that when these staving boards and back here bottom boards were put on, they extended across the keel and they had to be cut off. And the wood that was cut off has for centuries been referred to as dead wood. And so there's some thought that maybe that's where the word dead rise came from. Anyway, this photograph was taken probably 1982 in the shop of Grover Lee Owens, and you'll see Grover Lee in a minute. But this plank right here distinguished him from all the other builders on the bay, or not all of them, some used it. It's called a step plank, and you'll notice it's cut down as it goes aft. And that created a very smooth shape in his boat that everybody on the bay wanted. Another guy that did that was Edward Diggs. Grover wasn't the only one, but if they did that, they had a real distinct, slick looking boat. This was his boat shop in Deltaville. Pretty primitive. Had his bandsaw outside, did all his work out there. He had a canvas that he'd throw over it in the winter when he wasn't using it. There's Grover Lee right there. And this fellow was from Maryland. Traveler came up here. I don't know what his name is, but I know the boat came to Maryland, was worked in the oyster fishery. Skipjacks, twice, 1998 and 2002, National Fisherman got me to go cover the Deal Island skipjack races. And it was a lot of fun. I went out with Murphy the first year, and he'd won it, what, 9 years in a row or something? Yeah, well, that was the year he lost. So the next time I came back, there was no sense in asking Wadey. He wouldn't go take me out, that's for sure. But skipjacks or deadrise, or a deadrise, have a deadrise hull. This was just a shot we took. There's some others. I think this was at the 1998 race. This was at one of those races. I don't know where Shirley Shack was, but what a great, setting. The way it used to be. I don't know what it's like now, but also you can see there's a Maryland style boat with a much more flair in it than the Virginia style boats have. All right, this was on the IVW, and this was Captain Johnny Ward's water barrel. So the day I went out with him in the mid-80s, I got thirsty. He said, well, go ahead and get some water in your water barrel. So I went up and I pulled that canvas. That's a piece of canvas with a piece of metal in it that's holding it down. And the water was green. Needless to say, I didn't drink anything out of it. But that actually came off a schooner, a sailing schooner. It's a water barrel off a sailing schooner. Edmund Harrison. That is a classic bar cat. The bar cats probably look more like the early deadrise boats that were first built on the bay, probably as close as anything they are. He started out with a sail. Edmund Harrison, that's him right there. This is Smith Island over here. He's crab scraping. That's what he's doing. He's catching feeler crabs and he's going after soft shell crabs. Anyway, he started his first boat was sail powered, and they worked great for sail power, but they were also very easy to adapt to engines, motors. There he is with his friend up there. I got a phone call. I'll share this with you. I got a phone call late one night at the house. Fellow with the name of Bob Vaness. He was in Salisbury. His father had been put in a nursing home, and the gentleman who was in the room with him was Mr. Harrison. And Bob told me that he said, Larry, I want to tell you this. He's got 2 books on his shelf right by him. He's got the Holy Bible and Harvesting the Chesapeake Tools and Traditions. I just about cried. But he was in harvesting. He was one of the key figures that Tom Horton told me that's one thing he wished he had done. And Tom Horton's done everything on the bay, I think. That he'd gone out with him. I said, well, that's one thing that I did you didn't do. There he is signing crabs. Woodland Rowe lived in Havana. He built skiffs. He had a little workshop there in town, and he fixed crab nets, crab net poles. So when my crab net pole would break, I'd take it to Woodland and he would fix it. And sometimes he'd charge me and sometimes he wouldn't. But anyway, he also built shucking boxes. That's what that is there. These were J.W. Hurley shucking house. He worked for them for years. And he built these type of box where the shuckers would stand in and shuck the oysters. That's called a Yankee basket. When Yankee oystermen began coming down to our area, this is what they brought. This was a bushel, and that's what they used to measure a bushel. And so Mr. Hurley did the same thing, and Woodland would repair them, and these handles were made out of oak, and he said that was the thing he had to repair the most. And there's that 1985 picture again of Nellie Crockett loaded down with oysters. You can see shoveling those things off was quite a task. Marion H. Here she was down at Norfolk at one of their affairs down there, loaded down with kids. It shows the diversity of the boats. Today she is known as the 55th Virginia. She led the parade at about a July 4th parade this year. And this was taken about 1996 when she was the Marion H. hammer and nails. I took this photograph at Deagle's and Sun Railway in Deltaville. And I couldn't get over how this guy could hammer the nails into the bottom. And I also couldn't get over, where did it? The elbows. This man was, you got to know what you're doing to be able to do that. And he was nailing into the bottom of the OA Bloxham. The OA Bloxham is not a deadrise boat. She's round bilge. And she happened to be down there in 1992 or something like that at Deagle's. Today, she is still alive, but dying at a dock in North Carolina. So that's another piece of Chesapeake Bay heritage that I'm afraid we're going to lose. They were pulling something out of to show you the size of that boat. That's Ed Diggle right there. Ed has passed away, but he ran the yard for many years. The yard no longer is in existence, but anyway, this was on the OA block, so they were pulling a gear out of it. This was taken on the eastern shore of Virginia, on the off of Watchaprig on the ocean side. It's an oyster watch house. It's called a Davis watch house. And I'm showing you this just because the many faces of the bay, it's not just about boats, it's about much more than that. And I went over there to do it. And there's a chapter in harvesting on oyster watch houses and oyster watch boats. They would stand out, they would get in these houses and live out here because poachers would come and steal these oysters from around there. And so they would spend the nights, and you can't see it now, but you can see where it was. You know, there was like a decking around the whole thing where they could stand on one side or the other, and they could watch out for the oyster beds. Patent tongs, golly day, this changed forever the oyster industry. It got to a point that they were catching the oysters were out in deeper water, and they couldn't handle a 50-foot long hand tong to get to the oysters. So they created the patent tong, and Mr. Marsh and Solomon's in 1887, he had the first patent, and then Mr. Brista and a Mr. Dixon in Starmont, Virginia, had the Virginia style. This is the actual original one that they built. And in 1898, they took it to the World's Fair in Chicago, and it won a blue ribbon. And it came out of the same case that when they pulled it out of the box it was in, which was a large wooden box, they'd never taken it out since it'd been, at the World Fair. And this is what was written on it: patented by Brista and Dixon, Stormont, Virginia. Paula Johnson and Mr. Taylor, can't remember his first name, but Paula, you'll probably know, was at Cal for many years and then went on to the Smithsonian Institute. But she did a wonderful book on boats on Smith Island. She did a lot of research there. And in doing so, they did a survey of all the boats as to where they were built. And 45% of the boats on Smith Island were built in Deltaville, Virginia. So she called me and asked me if I would take her around to talk to some of the builders. And that's Paula right there, and that's Willard Norris. Willard passed away about 3 years ago, and he was the last active builder in Deltaville. Oh, Dorothy Norris, what a wonderful lady. Dorothy was married to Hugh Norris. Captain Hugh, they got married, I don't know, in the 20s, I guess. And I love the story she'd tell. She said, Hugh asked me to marry him. I loved Hugh. I loved him so very much. But I told him, no, I'm not going to marry. And Hugh said, well, why not? He said, because you're a sailing man. You work on schooners. You're not going to be home at all. And so she said, if you want to marry me, you're going to have changed professions. So he went to boat building and crabbing, and they got married. This is a hull scene sheet. There were areas in Middlesex even in the 1940s, during segregation, there were segregated boat landings. And African Americans primarily used what was referred to as Percival Landing. It was on Parrots Creek, way back in the woods. And somebody told me, said, you know, the Holstein shed is still back there. And so I went back there, and not only was the Holstein shed there, but the graveyard of log canoes. I mean, probably 20 log canoes where, you know, time had passed and they weren't in great shape, needless to say, but I took photographs of them, what have you. But it was sort of a, I mean, wait, I'm talking about 2 miles back in the woods, and I got halfway down in my car and had to stop and walk the rest of the way. It was quite an experience going to the Holstein shed that was still standing after about, I mean, they'd stopped using it 30 years before that, I'm sure. And there's the Holstein that was still in it, which was unbelievable.
Could you tell me what the word is you're using?
Yeah.
Holstein?
Holstein, yeah. When the English first came over here, they brought a gear called Holstein, S-E, like, you know, like a net. And a Holstein is a form of gear where you put one end on the land and you drag it out into the water as far as you can. And when the fish run into it, then you bring the end in the water out and you bring it to the land. And then you've got men and people on land that are actually dipping the fish up and putting them in barrels. And it's called a haul seine. And it was a very effective way of catching. After a while, they, in the 1940s, they invented what was called a purse pocket. So at that point, they could take the fish, they would catch so many fish that so many of them would suffocate when they're on land. So the purse pocket would do just what a pound net pocket would do. And they would capture the fish and tie it off. And then they would drag it out by boat out in deep water. And then they would get the fish out. That way fish wouldn't suffocate because they were in deep water. But that's what that is. That's a haul seine right there, that net right there. You know who that is? Wadey Murphy. Recognize it. Everybody recognize Wadey? That rascal wouldn't take me out on the next skipjack race because I brought him bad luck. And there she is. That was at Tillman right here. 84, 85 probably. I don't know. Yeah, more faces of the Chesapeake Bay, African Americans and Menhaden fishermen, the Channymen. Sorry, I don't have the songs. I can't tell you what they are, but the Channymen, when they were pulling the nets, and they were all trying to hoist them up, they would sing songs that to keep them in rhythm, so they were pulling together, and also to keep them from thinking about how hard of work they were doing, and so after all this is said and done, nowadays they don't have to pull the nets. They've got power blocks, you know, hydraulic power blocks. They'll just pick them all up. But back then it took 16, 17 men to pull them up. Anyway, after all was said and done, and the old timers, they would come back together at different events and they would sing the chanties that they sang so many years ago. That's them right there. Rob and Jay, that's Alvin and his wife, Barbara. She was launched in 1986 in Deltaville. Miss Joanne, she was built by Robert Green. She was also launched about 1985, I guess, in Deltaville. They were turning boats out like crazy during that period of time. There's Robert right there. He's 79 now, and he's still running fishing parties, but he doesn't build boats. Can't do it anymore, he said. William Rollins, in the book Harvesting, the centerfold chapter is on how to build a log canoe. And Mr. Rollins in Pocosin, he's passed away now, but there he's building a three log vessel, and I think here she is finished. There she is. That was the last. Pocosin was a center of log canoe building in Virginia. And this, to my knowledge, is the last one that was built. And I was so fortunate to drive back and forth down to Pocosa month after month, year after year. He finally finished it. And we have it in harvesting Chesapeake tourism tradition. And that's 3 logs. I've told this story many times, but that log right there, he had the hull about finished. And there's a disease, probably some of you will know what it is, whereas the wood rots from the inside, you can't see it from the outside. Anyway, that log rotted away, and that slowed the progress down for about 1.5 years, I guess, because he got so disgusted because the log was bad. But we had to have that chapter, and we did. We waited. Roosevelt Wingfield, what a wonderful man, I'll tell you. Rosie was born, I don't know, in the 20s. He oystered all his life. He's the last oysterman that I know that used a bamboo pole to sound the bottom for oysters. Most oyster my grandfather did. He used the tongs to sound the bottom. Yeah, but Roosevelt would use a bamboo pole. Quite frankly, that's why I went out with it. Hard times, right there. This guy, Roosevelt was catching oysters. These guys weren't. They were way over there doing nothing. Roosevelt waved to him and says, "Come on over here. We got a lump over here." And so by that time, both were catching oysters. They were looking out for one another. Now, this is a classic chunk, round stern, on a deadrise boat. And the chunks, you see how these are built, how they're put? Well, the chunks are layered. And the seams are layered so that no seams go over the other ones. This is a classic log canoe style of building a pointed bow as well as a round bow. And so that's a tradition that actually came from log canoe building. I love to tell this story. These 2 are the last 2 that he owned the Maggie and he owned the Columbia FC, the last 2 schooners in 1947, 48. And so these were nephews. These 2 guys were nephews. So Evie asked me to do a story on these 3 for the book. So I said, yeah, but you got to get them together. And so he got them together and told me when to be there. And I got there and they'd been there for about an hour. And over here, you can't see it, was a bar. And they had been drinking the whole time. And this is the only time I've ever done this. I'd ask them a question and the answer was so good, I just couldn't make it any better by putting in a paragraph. So if you look in the book, Chesapeake Legacy, the question's there and their answer is there. Amazing experience. Chief Miles, chief of the Pamunkey Indian Reservation. When shad, 1990s, I think they banned harvesting the shad in Virginia. Chief Miles could still go out. The Native American Indians could still go out. So there he is with his net hauling in shad. And I love this photograph. If you look right there, that's a lantern that it sits on wood. That's the lantern that he used at each end of his net so people can see him when they go by. Wonderful man. Planking fish. I always, I'd never been to a shad planking, but I'd heard about it and I wanted to write about them. So we thought about, I knew there was one in another area of the state, but then I found out they did it right down there in Deltaville at the firehouse. So that's what called shad planking. There they are. All right, it's Henry Lackey. Henry Lackey is the last of the diesel engine mechanics he would come to your boat dock to fix your boat. And he helped so many deadrise boat builders course, the concept of insurance and all that kind of stuff now, has taken that, he's aged out of the business anyway. It's showing how they plank them, how they put them on the boards. This is a classic Deadrise. She was built for sail, not for power. And you can see how it was adapted. There's a sailboat keel with a steering stick. She was originally built for sail. The May King was her name. She died about, I don't know, 15 years ago. I went down to see her when they burned her up. Really sad. I threw this photograph in there because of Deadrise boat played such a major role in the lives of African Americans. And after slavery, so many of them stayed, and a lot of them lived where they were living. And this is the, as far as I know, is the last enslaved hut or in Middlesex County. But that shows you what they were living in at that time. Shad fishing. This was on the York River, and it was a chapter on stake gill nets. They have stakes, the gill net is attached to it. One of the few places that they did that in Virginia. And so that was one of the chapters in harvesting. Bobby Crockett built boats on Tangier Island. You can really see what the inside of a clean boat shop is like. Most boat shops are not like that. Bobby has long since passed. He learned how to build a boat by going over and working with Grover Lee Owens for 6 months, and then came back, went to work on his own. There he is, and boy, you can really see, look at the dead rise, straight rise in that boat. Dead rise. Now, this is a classic shot of a boat being set up. When I was talking about my grandfather, this is what Mr. Wright and the two other men came from Deltaville to do so that my grandfather and Lawrence Parker could finish the boat. Once you get it to this point, most anybody can finish it. But to get it to that point, you got to know what you're doing. Beautiful break. I think that was taken at Tillman. I think. Tucker Lee. One crab, I went out with him trot line. What an experience that was. Tucker told me to beat his boat at 10 o'clock a.m. I said to myself, no waterman goes out at 10 o'clock a.m. No waterman. So I got in the car, I drove up in the wee hours of the morning and got to his boat by 3 o'clock. And sure enough, at 5 o'clock, Tucker came to his boat. And I said, Tucker, what's this all about? He said, oh, I've taken journalist day before and I've had such a time with them. I just didn't want to take you out, you know? I said, my Lord, I was coming all the way from Virginia, you know? But I was smart enough to know that no waterman was going out at 10 o'clock in the morning. We had a wonderful time, and I think Tucker was glad he did it, and I was certainly glad we did it. Love Point, isn't that close by here somewhere? I think this net was setting off Love Point. It was the day I was with Tucker. I like the boat. That's the Maryland boat. And it's high-sided. It's a neat Deadrise. It's a nice photograph. There's Tucker, cat quick, pulling those crabs. Eel potting, the diversity of these boats and how many fisheries they're used in. In all of my books, that was one of the things I wanted to point out was how many different ways the boats were used. And this is, of course, eel potting. Of course, eels have gone by the wayside. They've been overfished, and I don't even know whether there's a fishery left, but this was taken in Maryland. Oh, this is the roller that was used, I guess, to roll bread at his home, but he decided that he was going to, see what I'm talking about? He decided that he would make it into a roller for his trot line, which I thought was kind of neat. Creative. Oh, yeah. I always throw a photograph like this in because the bay and the water played such a amazing role in the spiritual life of all of us. Whether it's that walking down that dock down there and wind blowing in your face and how wonderful it is, from a Christian standpoint, it really played a role from the Baptist standpoint. And this guy right here, Chauncey Mann, he was a minister. He invited me to come to a baptismal in the river, and I said, "Yeah, that sounds like a good story." And it was a good story. Hickory oyster mops. I don't know whether you all had them up here or not, but we use two types of mops to clean our boats off down in Virginia. One was made out of hickory and the other was made out of corn shucks. A lot of watermen like corn shucks because it didn't scratch the boat like a hickory mop would, but corn shuck mop didn't last very long. This gentleman, Mr. Birch, I can't think of Mr. Birch's first name, but anyway, I found out he was making them and I wanted to use him in Harvesting in Chesapeake to show how a hickory mop was made. And he agreed to it. And then the time we were supposed, this is funny, I don't know, this happened a lot over the years. The time to come and do the interview, Mr. Birch was not home, but the hickory mop was sitting on the front door with a note saying, "I'd rather not be in your book." But I know somebody that would, and it happened to be McKinley Wilson, African-American. And McKinley is the one that's profiled in the book. And this guy was wonderful. McKinley Wilson was something special too. I put this in here because this is a John Wright skiff, and this is exactly the type of skiff that I had. I got when I was 11 years old. Got a 1959 Evinrude, Christmas of 1960. No, Christmas of 1959. But Daddy was able to buy it at a discount because 1960 Evinrudes had already come in. And it was built by John Wright in Deltaville. John Wright built my skiff. And I tell you what, that skiff opened up the world to me in regards to the bay and wonderful memories. Small boats have played a major role in Chesapeake Bay's life. This is a shot taken on the Rappahannock River up near Tappahannock, Virginia, where 20 years ago, there was still a thriving fishery up there with shad, crabs, and other things. That fishery's pretty much gone. But these boats, these skiffs, were built specifically so that they could moor them in an area that was a little ways away that was protected. So they made them fairly low sided, which is an indication and the truth about all deadrise boats, that every feature in a deadrise boat was built for a purpose. And if it happened to be where you were fishing and you needed a low sided boat, you had a low sided boat. Same thing with the barcats, they're low sided because they're fishing in Tangier Sound. And this is the end. That's the last one. I often conclude with this photograph because this is on Tangier Island. And when you walk along the pass, there are the graveyards right there. It's quite an experience. And to think about all the people that the bay, the role that the bay has played in generations and generations of folks that have lived here. And I'm going to close now, and I'll answer any questions if you like. But I'm going to read to you the skipjack prayer, and then I'll be done. I'll be glad to answer any questions if you have them. So at Deal Island every year, this is the prayer that they use. Our Father and Creator of the sea, who has sent the stars to guide our course, the sun for our daytime, the moon for our watch in the night, help us navigate again today. Take us over shoals and waves. Take us into pleasant seas and a free, fair wind to sail again with our captains and vessels and crews. Help us to be worthy seamen upon your orders, and may we honorably apply our skills, and may those skills bravely bring us to victory. Keep us vigilant and sober in judgment, fair sportsmen and competitors as we were as oystermen of years gone by. May we sail today by the grace along these bay shores of beauty and bounty, free of storm and calamity, but always aware of the great and beautiful environment in which we sail. We will remember the captains and the vessels and the crews as a memorial of which we represent today. You have surely given us favor by their heroics and their labor over fog, sand, and bars. In respect, we shall today under your divine power and your beautiful sky. We praise you and we ask a blessing for the victor and for the vanquished. We all sail today as victors, a fleet that has won from worm and rot, rust, and wrestle with time and machine, and storm, calm, and regulations. We are the victor. The day we sail again. Amen. That's it.
That was fabulous. Thank you so much. We have a tremendous opportunity to be able to ask questions. We have people online and also in the room. So if you have a question, raise your hand and I'll come to you with the microphone. And I'm going to pass the baby off. Anybody want to start?
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. I have the privilege of working on the Winnie Estelle, replacing the bottom, and just have a question, technical question for you. Which is, so the staving up front starts off parallel with the stem, and then eventually ends up at 15 degrees to.
Flags out, goes back.
And I'm curious as to why the bottom boards are not perpendicular to the keel, but are angled 15 degrees.
Well, I assume that it creates a better V by doing it that way, but I don't know that for a fact. But just in my mind, when I think about that, they're trying to get as a pronounced V as they can get in that bow in order to cut through that choppy seas. I mean, Chesapeake Bay, it's a choppy sea. It's not like the ocean that rolls. And so they're trying to create as sharp a V, as straight a V, a dead rise as they can. And I think that's why they do that. But John England would be a better one to ask than me.
The other reason is that the theory was if the planks are all parallel the whole way, all the way back, and they swell up, blows the transom off the boat.
Oh, yeah.
So if you rake them back a little bit, you're taking
a
that pressure off the
swelling
hull.
angle, yeah. That's, yeah, you leave a little gap in your bottom plank boards. And the reason you do that is if you don't, it swells up and it's too tight. It gets too tight. So you want them to be tight, but not too tight. Tight enough that they don't leak, but not too tight that they buckle a little bit. Does that make sense?
Who else?
You mentioned that there's very little crab picking in Virginia now,
Yeah.
which really surprised me because we do quite a bit of that here.
Yeah. There are not many crab picking houses in Virginia. There is one large one in Norfolk and maybe 2 or 3 others, but most of small picking houses have closed. They claim that it's because the crab dredge fishery went away because they caught primarily female crabs. And of course you got the basket fishery where you buy a bushel of crabs and then you got the picking end of it. And the picking end of it was usually crabs like female crabs and what have you. And of course the basket fishery, the jimmy crabs, large jimmies. And so they claim that they have lost their product, so they don't know. But I know this, they are getting crabs from the Gulf now, which I find interesting. Is that happening up here? You know? It is, yeah. And so that's what's kept them alive, I think. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
to follow through on that dredging. Can you speak to the dangers of that kind of fishing over during the winter months? I've heard that it's just very, very dangerous.
Extremely dangerous, yeah. Well, you saw how they were dressed. I don't know whether I had a shot of any of them dressed, but you know, how they're dressed, but they've got, you know, they've got waders here. And, they're working in, cold freezing conditions. Not only, you've got water, salt water spraying up on the deck. And if that freezes, that creates a slippery situation. That has been one of the concerns of bringing the fishery back. Because it is a dangerous fishery. You're doing it in the middle of winter. If you go overboard in the middle of winter, odds are you're gonna have a hard time saving somebody's life. But that's a fishery that, been around for a long time. But I applaud Virginia for not allowing it. I think that, I don't know that it really, helps from an environmental standpoint. But I think it can't be good to catch all those female crabs. It just can't be. Yeah. Well, if that's it, anybody else?
Any other questions? I've got, two more. We're gonna start with,
I sell books afterwards.
I'll be right over there. Yes, ma'am.
all right, Joe, I'm coming to you for our last question.
Go ahead. Oh,
They're well-trained.
I keep forgetting about the mic.
I just had a couple of quick questions. If you could tell me again, on the slide that you had up there of the frame of boat had the stem and the keel. It was just before the skipjacks on your slide presentation. But you referred to a 4.5 plank underneath the chine that had the curve in it.
A step plank. Step.
Okay, and you used two different terms to describe the bottom planks forward and a different term for going aft. What was that?
Well, the staving board is the ones in the bow,
Uh-huh.
and just bottom planks are the ones that are not as far up to the close of you know, to the stem.
Okay.
But you got, to create that V, you need narrow boards, and that's referred to as staving. And believe it or not, the first deadrise boats built, they used blocks, just like I showed you on the stern. They actually were able to create on the canoes in Virginia. They were actually use blocks to create that V. But what you're referring to is staving and then bottom planking, which is a wider board. The bottom plank is a wider board.
Mhm.
That's
I got it.
Got it?
Thanks.
okay.
Thanks.
Not sure I got it.
All right, I'm sure that if you think of something, Larry will be here, and you have one last thought?
So just to clarify on that point, when you talk about cross planking.
Right.
Is that referred to the difference between the vertical stave and bottom and the horizontal strip plank, or is it that they're
It's
two
universal.
layers?
No, it's not 2 layers, although there have been boats built with 2 layers of bottom planking. In fact, there was one guy in Guinea that built them with 3 layers of bottom planking. But,
How would you define cross?
well, cross planking is, well, long planking is stem to stern. Cross planking is from side to side. Simple as that, yeah. You know, in Potomac, they build a deadrise boat, but they use what they refer to as long planking. And of course, they have a you know, a box that they steam and they bend the long planks. And they never stop doing it. Even when we got into cross planking, which is, some would say it's a little easier to build a cross plank boat than it is a long, but yeah, a cross planked boat is from side to side, it's laid side to side.
That would be below the chine.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, yes. No, it's not in the sides.
Above that,
No, you're just going, you're long plank, stripping long plank, yeah.
All right. Larry, thank you so much for being here. This was
My pleasure.
tremendous.
Mentioned the aluminum.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's still built, aluminum. Deadrise, for the van,